What do you do on Sundays?
We talk about Cate Blanchett, the acting, the costumes, the awards, but mostly the Blanchett of it all.
I'm not acting.
You think this is a love affair?
I saw you, Erica. Meeting in the middle.
This is Sundays with Cate, and I'm your host, Murtada Elfadl. Welcome to Sundays with Cate, the podcast series about the films of Cate Blanchett. Every time we choose a Cate Blanchett film and I discuss it with a guest. I'm going to start with a programming notice for this week's episode. Just because of some commitments I have during the months of April and May, I am going to a bi-monthly podcast. So it's going to be every other Sunday. So apologies for people who have been waking up Sundays to spend time with Cate Blanchett. It will have to just be every other Sunday. So I'm very excited to welcome to the podcast writer and critic Ela Bittencourt. Ela, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me on the podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. I have been a fan of your writing, and I'm very excited to talk to you today about Jim Jarmusch's 2003 movie Coffee and Cigarettes.
Let's do it.
But since this is a Cate Blanchett podcast, I just want to start by asking you about your impression of her. Just generally, yes, no. What do you think of when you think of Cate Blanchett and her performances?
I love her. I mean, and for so many various reasons, obviously, I don't even follow, it's interesting because I don't even follow the Hollywood cinema, but that much. I'm kind of on my daily viewing and what I love to watch on my own. But she has such a range that, that you kind of end up loving the films that she brings that kind of star power to anyway, primarily based on what you might have seen in smaller movies. And I got to, from my New York, kind of obsessive, going to band years for all the theater festivals. Mm-hmm. I got to also see her in Streetcar Named Desire. And that was kind of cool. I don't even remember how many years back. It was probably quite a while back. But, and that's interesting because I do recall that even there, like there were certain directorial choices that were made for her and like how she was staged that I didn't necessarily love. But even there, theater is such a difficult test for actors who don't do a lot of theater but have done a lot of cinema, because in the cinema you've got this kind of close-up thing, and sometimes actors are very caged in and kind of are not able to find the kind of expressivity of your body on stage. But I don't know. I remember her being quite entrancing, and as always. So yeah, that's one of my memorable remembrances of Cate.
Yeah, I mean,
a lot about her. That she did it well.
Yeah. She actually, I think, thinks of herself mostly as a theater actor because she started with the Sydney Theatre Company. And then she took almost a decade of the movies to run the Sydney Theatre Company, which was part of when she did.
So when was this?
So this was around the time right after she did Streetcar, which I also saw at BAM. And it was an amazing production, and she was really great in it. But so from, I think, 2008 until 2013, she was running the Sydney Theatre Company. And in that time, she didn't make that many movies. And so she was concentrating mostly on theater. And I have seen her every time she came to New York. She did The Maids with Isabelle Huppert. I saw that. She did The Present on...
Yeah, I would love to have seen that. I would have killed too. Because I also got to see Isabelle Huppert in Sarah Kane's, one of Sarah Kane's plays, like separately in Psychosis, right? I saw her in that. But yeah, to see them together, oh my God.
That staging, I wasn't in love with the staging. It was Benedict Andrews who has all this flair for like putting lots of cameras on stage and lots of movement. I wasn't in love with the staging.
Right? It's the latest thing. It's the latest thing that's not so latest. I mean, that's like a trend that's has at least 15 years behind it already, right?
Yeah. So I wasn't in love with that production, but yes, she and Isabelle Huppert and also Elizabeth Debicki, who was the third actor in that production, were all great. But yeah, Streetcar is basically, I think it's one of my favorite ever stage performances that I've seen. I'm biased, obviously.
I wish that like BAM had its theater recordings, and I don't know if there's like question of rights. Obviously, there probably are, right? But I wish that like so much more theater was available to us, via screenings. I mean, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic there was a lot, but like for example, BAM, like just the history of of the theater festivals would have been amazing. See
I
all
mean,
these
the
actors.
National Theatre in London is very good at that. They always have the recordings and they put it out, which they put the Streetcar with Gillian Anderson. But yeah, I don't know. And this is a Sydney Theatre company production, so they're not that good at it yet. Haven't seen anything from them. Yeah,
Yeah, but that's
so
what I think of Kate. I think she's phenomenal.
she is. She's really phenomenal. And so we're going to talk about coffee and cigarettes. And, if we were talking about a persona of a star, this is like sort of the perfect movie to talk about that because she plays a version of herself in this movie. So if you don't know Coffee and Cigarettes, it's Jim Jarmusch's vignette or anthology movie that was released in 2003. It's a few vignettes where 2 or 3 characters sit around and talk while they're drinking coffee and smoking. And the vignette that Kate's in, which is called Cousins, she plays herself, or a heightened version of herself, as Cate Blanchett, the movie star, meeting with her cousin, Shelly, in an LA or New York, it's not clear, but somewhere in America, where there's a film junket, but she takes time off from the film junket to meet with her sort of ne'er-do-well cousin. And she plays both characters. She's Cate Blanchett and she is Shelly. And that's sort of where the fun comes in that vignette.
Hi, so nice to see you.
Me too.
It's been ages.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, last time, what? It was a couple of years ago in Sydney, wasn't it?
Really? Was that 2 years ago? Wow. So, you're not with Mr. Kate and the baby on this trip? No. Unfortunately, no, by myself. I'll see you next week.
But before we jump into the movie, into Kate's performance, Ella, what do you think of Coffee and Cigarettes in general as a film?
Yeah, so I mean, I have to say it's been ages since I saw, ages. It's a 2003 film, so it shouldn't even feel like ages. But yeah, it's been a long while, so it's nice to kind of rewatch it and to remember, and it's been a while since I saw a Jim Jarmusch film. I did see Patterson, but I think the last film I really loved was Only Lovers Left Alive. That's a while. So yeah, I mean, it's actually refreshing, and I don't know. I mean, I don't want to sound cliche and say, the usual stuff, the pandemic and being on lockdown and it makes us look at things differently, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, it has this other kind of, not sentimental, but, there's some kind of like a emotional time loop value, right? Because the way he's also kind of has this quirky portrait of, our generation of coffee and cigarettes that's kind of all done, and obviously he kind of like very neatly wraps it up in movie history as well, right? People meeting at these kind of dingy cafes, and it's all quirky and casual and weird, but you always feel the presence of like the movie and film and television industry all around you because these characters are so tied to it, at least some of them, and to like the entertainment and musicians and the kind of LA vibe, I guess. So yeah, you have to watch it.
And he always casts cool people. Like I think even when he did a movie that about, quote unquote ordinary people like Patterson was, the 2 ordinary people were Adam Driver and Golshifteh Farhani, which is like very cool choices to play ordinary.
Although I guess in Only Lovers Left Alive, he didn't go for the ordinary. He just said, let's do Tilda Swinton, like writ large. Let's do it. Let's go big. So I guess he was kind of not so ordinary. Although, I mean, some of those scenes, I guess the kind of landscape, right? And it's Detroit, right? The film.
The film is set in Detroit, yeah.
Right. So this kind of like post-industrial landscapes, torn down kind of stretches of housing and all of that. That that felt beyond ordinary, obviously, in the kind of vampiric scheme of that was kind of like also commentary on America writ large,
Yeah.
which he does in like much tinier, much more fleeting ways than in Coffee and Cigarettes.
Yeah. And the thing with Coffee and Cigarettes, like, talking about how he always casts cool people, like he has Iggy Pop, he has Tom Waits, he has Kate, he has Bill Murray, he has Reza and Jizza from the Wu-Tang Clan. So it's really like cool artists from pop music, from rock, movie stars like Bill and Kate. And there is comedians, Steve Coogan, and even somebody like Alfred Molina, who is not a star like Bill and Kate, but he's somebody who's very magnetic to watch on screen.
And it's kind of interesting how, like, because some of them, I mean, there really are skits, right? Like, 2 or 3 characters come on, and, it's not the same cafe, it's like different places, but it's always the same kind of, a table, chairs, and the camera that's kind of like, gaping at the table from, from the upward, downward looking perspective. And that it's interesting, like how some of these skits are more about the conversations themselves and the kind of rhythm of language, and how it is weird when a stranger accosts you in a cafe. That could happen anywhere. That's also very New York in a way, but it's very LA, it's very urban. Someone comes up to you and suddenly you're having conversation, but it's not quite sticking together. And then other of the skits, or like other parts of the skits, also seem to be about like people who are very aware who they are, right? Like that Molina thing. The kind of, one actor meets another actor and they're immediately kind of judging where they stand in the hierarchy, like, who's cool enough to talk to, and all this stuff. So it's interesting. I mean, and the Iggy Pop and Tom Waits also has that, right? Like hurting each other's egos and kind of like who's cooler. There's a lot of that stuff going on. It's joyful. I mean, it's wonderful to watch.
Yeah, I mean, if there is a theme that sort of emerged to me as I was watching this movie, is that this is maybe about 2 people who meet for coffee and cigarettes and have a conversation, but maybe at the end, it ends in sort of a regret that maybe they shouldn't have had this meeting. There is always, the disappointment, I think, is mostly felt in the Alfred Molina Steve Coogan vignette, which is about Alfred Molina being a fan of Steve Coogan and wanting to collaborate with him. And Steve Coogan is like, no, I'm too cool for you. I'm a star. And then it ends from Alfred Molina goes from eagerness to disappointment in that vignette. And in the end, it's like, he wishes he's never met Steve Coogan. And a lot of those things were like that. Like, to me, like if there was one theme about it, is that maybe these people shouldn't have had coffee and cigarettes.
Right. Well, they definitely talk a lot about how they shouldn't. They sometimes talk about how they shouldn't have so much coffee, and most of the time talk about how they, at that day and age, they shouldn't even be having cigarettes, which is kind of funny because I guess he started doing it in 1986, but they would have been talking about cigarettes, but probably pretty frivolously. Yeah, no, but it's interesting that you pointed out that these are people that it ends with regret. Yeah, and I mean, it ends kind of enigmatically, right? Because the last 2 characters are much older, and it kind of ends with a guy dozing off. Oddly enough, these are the only 2 characters that feel comfortable enough with each other. Like we have arrived at this duo that is a little different than the others, which is nice. But you're right that like most of the time, it feels like there is regret, and these are not necessarily friends meeting, right? So I think a director that's more straightforwardly interested in just kind of classic movie tension and classic narrative would have given us, would have said, oh, you need to have tension, you need to have risk, you need to have higher stakes. And there's not that much at stake in most of these conversations. I mean, in the Molina one, yes, there is. Because there's a big reveal of, these 2 guys who may have been somehow actually connected, right, by DNA and blood ties and so on. But most of the time, it's interesting in that sense. Even the cousins, when they meet, right, which is the Cate Blanchett skit, there's not that much at the end of the day that connects them. I mean, they're family, but at the end of the day, really strangers.
Yeah, they don't have much in common. What I also sort of noticed, another theme, is that most of these people sort of play themselves or a version of themselves. Like Cate is definitely going for a heightened version of herself, but somebody like Bill Murray is just being Bill Murray, or at least our idea of Bill Murray.
Yeah.
He's
But
very
it's
relaxed.
interesting because, I mean, Bill Murray is always Bill Murray in the movies, right? To the point where, like, Bill Murray almost cannot play anyone but Bill Murray by
Yes.
now, right? Um, but I think it's partly like Blanchett theater staging that allows her to make that contrast a little bit more heightened. Because I think that, I mean, I'm not saying it's in no way her skit comes off as artificial, not at all, but it does feel a little bit heightened compared to the naturalism of the other skits, where clearly you have a lot of actors who kind of like come on the set and they're pretty much mostly playing themselves. She's playing two people. So rather naturally, she must have asked herself how she's going to do it. Although, of course, the successful actress has the blonde hair, and the unsuccessful rocker girlfriend, right?
Yeah. So
the long blonde hair and this kind of different edgy feel. But yeah.
I mean, what you're saying is totally correct, because she does like she creates two completely different characters. Like even the Cate Blanchett character is not really her, because it's a sort of like a version of her, but there is also distinct two characters, like not just the hair, but even the voice. Like the one as Cate is more sort of an Australian continental accent, while the one as Shelly is more sort of on the nose, hard edge Australian accent. And then the voice is more breathy as Cate, more affected, while as Shelly, it's sort of more low pitched, more sort of grounded. Like sounds like somebody who smokes 20 packs a day.
Yeah,
so
they're both smokers, but yeah, they have this very distinct. It's deeper. His voice is deeper, and yeah, and it's interesting because I mean, even before they speak, just the first facial impression, of is the character's name Cate as well?
Yeah,
she's called Cate at the end, right? Or Kid, so I guess
Cate and Shelly.
it is yeah, Cate and Shelly. So yeah, I mean, when you see, I mean, Cate, it's interesting because even facially, I mean, it's a bit of a, I mean, the vignette is very brief, but it is a bit of a master class, actually, right? In acting. I mean, it's in that sense, it's really wonderful and very worth watching. I mean, the film itself is a lot of fun, but that skit particularly, or that vignette particularly, even like Cate has all these very controlled facial movements. I mean, she's very frozen. She's very limited in what she emits as the actress, who kind of, I mean, there's a certain smile. It's not 100% fake, but even towards her cousin, it's like very locked in. The facility with which kind of the lips immediately curve up into this kind of photogenic thing, and the hair is being fixed, right? Whereas when Cate Blanchett is playing Shelley, it's interesting because she chose like this whole array of like facial tics. I mean, that face is so much more animated, right?
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
She's like playing with her tongue. She's visibly rolling her tongue in her mouth. She's making faces all the time. She's much more vocal. It's wonderful to see, and also this bodily contrast, right? I mean, the Cate is Cate with a sort of perfect posture, very rigid, almost. I mean,
yeah, she's sitting ramrod straight. Yeah,
where there's this kind of affectation of cool. Like this performance that Cate is doing has none of that. It's a little bit rigid, but I think that that's what allowed her to make these two characters really so contrasty in many ways, right? Because the other one, Cate Blanchett, is Shelley. I mean, she's kind of all like her shoulders are are hunched down. She scrolls her legs. I mean, she has this kind of body language, very sloppy, comfortable, but also kind of awkward. Yeah.
And this is one of the themes sort of that, as I've been rewatching a lot of her movies and talking to a lot of people about these performances on this podcast, it's one of the conclusions that we arrive to is that she's somebody who uses the whole of her body in every performance. And this is, this 11-minute short movie, which is actually available on YouTube. So if you don't want to watch all of Coffee and Cigarettes, you can just go to YouTube and watch Cousins.
Oh, really? Wow,
yeah.
Look at that shortcut.
And you will see this contrast in the how she manages the body movements of both these characters. Like we just talked, the Cate movie star character is very sort of straight and rigid and sitting with not a lot of movement. The Shelly character is slouching in the seat. She talks with her arms. They're always, flailing around. And, even the way that even if you look at the way they hold the cigarette, it's very different. So even though this is sort of a short movie, and I'm sure she probably made it in 2 or 3 days, like there is a lot of work that goes into building these characterizations, which is something that I love about her as an actress. And I think if you look at some of her other sort of not straight big movies that she makes with Todd Haynes or Scorsese or Woody Allen or whatever, if you look at something like Manifesto, which was this installation where she played 13 characters but then was released as a movie, this movie reminded me a lot of that, in that this is not just a collaboration with the director. Here is Jim Jarmusch. It's also a collaboration with the makeup artist, with the costumer, to sort of create this character, two characters in this movie. And in Manifesto, it was 13 different characters. So I think this is one of the things that she loves to do, and that always sort of come apparent in her performances.
Yeah, and I love the idea that she did it, right? I mean, that, that she was up for playing the part of Shelly, which kind of the purpose of Shelly is just this constant kind of calling out bullshit.
Yes.
Right, on this stardom that of course is there also to hide a lot of insecurity and the need for validation and feeling extremely inferior.
I mean, the whole thing is a joke, right? She's sort of poking fun at herself a little bit in that she created this other cousin, sort of like what if she didn't become this accomplished actress? Maybe she would have been Shelly. So it's like, and then Shelly sort of keeps nudging her about her success. And Cate, the movie star, grows a little bit. While she remains throughout the skit always generous to her cousin, she's also like a little affected, a little maybe too much into the whole I'm a movie star thing. Like, there is a little bit where she talks about how, the paparazzi, they follow around, what you call celebrities. And I'm like, that's sort of like a little bit of a nod into how, it's just poking fun of herself as an actress, as a celebrity, as a movie star.
There's some photographer paparazzi guys hanging out front. I guess they kind of follow you around, right? Oh, whatever so-called celebrities are around, I suppose.
God, that must be a real fucking drag sometimes, right? I mean, not like me. I'm free. Practically broke, but I'm completely free. No one's stalking me, that's for fucking sure. Except when they thought I was you. I got into this club once because they thought I was you. And they found out I wasn't and they asked me to leave. Pretty fucking rude. Oh, don't get me wrong, I mean, must be fabulous, you got it all. You got a great husband, beautiful baby, travel all over the world, stay in fancy hotels, parties. Yeah, well, you know what they say, the grass is always greener.
Yeah, and I think also like in a very real, yes, very brief, but also a very kind of magnetic way, I guess it allows her to tap into what made her a great actress in the first place, right? Because she's done all kinds of roles, and the roles where she had to tap into some edgy stuff and some difficult roles, that probably gave her many more opportunities to actually show her chops and to show her craft that she might have today if she takes on a kind of big Hollywood role, which, can be very limited. It's interesting because I saw, I was looking up like what she would have done around that time, because Coffee and Cigarettes is 2013, and then I saw that I guess it's the same year that she did.
So Little Fish is the movie she did in 2004, where it's an Australian movie where she was a junkie. Yes, but it is a year after this. Yeah,
and it's incredible. I mean, she pulls no punches, and like Little Fish, I mean, she really has to kind of, that character spirals down.
Yeah.
And has to have a lot of edge, and Verica Garin, such a tough, smart performance, you know. So I think that, on the other hand, it makes sense that it would only kind of, in a matter of a flash, you know, she's able to go from this kind of glitzy thing to which she probably, as a surface, relates a lot less to actually this other kind of, you know, harsh, truth-hitting, no bullshit, you know, character.
And you know, that's like, we have an episode on Little Fish, so if you're listening to this and want to know more about that movie, it's very little seen, but I think it contains one of her best performances. And to what you were saying, Ella, it's definitely very gritty and unlike any of a lot of her movies. Because like, if you think about when she plays Katharine Hepburn, or where she plays Elizabeth or Carol, it's all these sort of very glamorous, exceptional women who are always like, you know, a monarch or somebody who, you know, at the top of their profession, like Katharine Hepburn. You know, there's very accomplished, smart women, but you know, in Little Fish, you know, the woman is definitely the character she plays very definitely smart, but it's also very gritty, and she's dealing with being an addict and sort of dealing with sort of unlike a lot of her performances, and to do it in the same year after Coffee and Cigarette, and actually right before she played Katharine Hepburn. Like, I think that the mid-aughts were like a time where she was doing a lot of different things. And, you know, it's definitely great father for me as a fan, but also father for me as somebody who's doing this podcast, that I get to talk about all these different contrasts in her performances.
Yeah, it would be, I mean, I would like to rewatch Elizabeth someday, because I recall it requiring her being so austere in that role, right? I mean, in a way, whereas in Carol, she got to do all these shadings of like vulnerability, and then the Woody Allen movie, she kind of gets to do a contemporary version of, you know, of Blanche in Streetcar, and that's how I relate to that role. So yeah, it's interesting that like each of those roles actually have a slightly different shading. She managed to find a way to really live that.
Yeah, and it's fun to watch sort of this movie. Also reminded me, I don't know, Ella, if you saw, she did an episode of Documentary Now, which is this spoof show, and she played a version of Marina Abramovich, and sort of got to recreate a lot of Abramovich's installations and career. And she was also playing her with a nod, with sort of a silly nod to like, does art mean anything? What does art mean? Is our artists just, you know, all they do is hubris and they're in their own head? So it's a very sort of fun, I think if she takes what she did with Jarmusch here, which is this sort of idea about, you know, what is an actress, and, you know, and poking fun at herself with this other character, and sort of like expands on it with that, and using sort of the same tools that she uses here, which is like, it's a complete performance head to toe. Like, she changes the way she looks, she changes the way she moves, she changes the way she talks. She makes her Hungarian, so she has a Hungarian accent as her version of Marina Abramovich. So it's always these fun things that, you know, and again, Documentary Now, like this Vignette Cousins, it's short. It's a 30-minute sort of spoof that's just very funny, but also she gets to do the stuff that obviously she likes to do.
Yeah, and it must have been fun for her to like work with Jarmusch. I wonder, it did make me wonder, like, how much, and I don't know if this is something that, you know, I haven't seen anything like around the film. I haven't read any reviews that mention that, but like how much the actors actually contributed to the screenplay. I mean, if this is just something that Jarmusch handed them, or we say, hey, I do want to do this little vignette with you, and like we just write some lines. What kind of scene we could do? I mean, I'd be very curious because
yeah. I haven't actually, in my research about this, I haven't found anything about that. But I think it's a good point that you bring up, because like some of them feel very scripted. Like a lot of them are just sort of hang around. Like the one with Bill Murray, I think it's sort of more naturalistic. It's sort of like hang around. The one maybe with Alfred Molina and Steve Coogan, maybe there was a story outline, but then those actors seem to be to just riffing off. But I would be interested to know what Cate had to work with, because she was working with herself, and I'm sure there wasn't anybody to play off against. So she probably shot all of the scenes as one character, and then all the other scenes as the other, and they were put together. So I'm guessing, and this is just a guess, that maybe hers was a little bit more scripted than the other ones. And this is one thing that I sort of didn't like about Coffee and Cigarettes, is that some of the vignettes were not as successful as the others, and it depended on who was in them. And I think this is a great point, because what you brought about, like, how was it scripted or not? I think, for instance, the Jack White and Meg White one was one of the worst ones, because they talk about Nicholas Tesla, and then they're not comfortable in front of the camera. They are very their delivery is not engaging, and sort of you're just like waiting for it to end. While when you're watching Cate, it's like you're fun, you're enjoying her, even though all the conversations in this movie are banal. Like they just talk about coffee and cigarettes, or how you're doing, or did you get my boyfriend's CD? It's just the way that people talk when they meet for coffee and cigarettes. It's not like anything that's beyond that. But I guess because of the charisma of the actors, in some of these they take you through it. But in others, I just felt like I wasn't having as much fun. And one of my biggest surprises was the Iggy Pop Tom Waits one, because I was like, oh, Iggy Pop Tom Waits, this is going to be fun. But I think that was one of the ones where I just saw this movie yesterday, and I can't tell you what they talked about or what their vignette was about. What did you think of sort of the success from one to the other? Did you see that contrast, or was it different for you?
I see what you mean. I mean, some of them are just meant to take you by surprise and are just kind of, I mean, I think that opening one, and now I'm going to forget what is the name of the Italian actor who's in it?
Roberto Benigni.
So yeah, I think that one is just kind of meant to take you by surprise. Then if you've seen, the Jarmusch is Down by the Law, and just this idea that like this random guy meets this other guy, and they have this brief conversation, and then one just out of like pleasantness or some kind of bizarre solidarity agrees to take the other guy's dental appointment. I mean, yes. I always think of that as the kind of quintessential Jarmusch, the promise of something so totally bizarre that probably could never, but that could happen. When it's kind of like quick on its feet and surprising, and kind of keeps moving and is fresh, it's more interesting. But you're right, and I think that, I mean, Cate's vignette doesn't have that, but it's just that she carries it, and I guess that there's enough novelty in us just kind of like looking to one, looking to the other, and cueing in from the fact how she can pull it off and convince us that these are two different people.
So what when you say fresh, which ones are you thinking of? Which one did you like most?
I think particularly the first one, actually. That's the most kind of surprising to me, and like the spirit of just being genuinely funny. And then probably the Bill Murray one, but it's only because the absurdity and the obviousness that like Bill Murray isn't working at a cafe. So this kind of collision of what we know about the film world versus this kind of fake world of this supposedly, very modest, innocuous cafe. Like, where are we? What kind of world is this? I think the ones where there's sparkle in the dialogue, basically.
No, I was just going to say that I also liked the Bill Murray one. And I thought that I like what you said about that there is a spark and a freshness to it. because even though he is playing something familiar, which is the Bill Murray that we see, like you said, in every performance he gives, but there's also like there's a joke about how addicted he is to coffee and he keeps drinking from a coffee pot straight. And so there is a little bit of unexpectedness, like, and they never answer the question of why is he a waiter in this cafe? And so that one was fun. I also liked, I think we already talked about it, I like the Molina, Steve Coogan one. Steve Coogan is an actor I don't respond to at all, but Molina was so affecting. Like, I think he's probably the only person in this movie who is giving like a real performance, because he has like this character, and you sort of, he has an arc where he goes from eagerness to disappointment, and he sort of keeps changing his emotional stance, and his mood changes as the scene unfolds. So in this movie, that's sort of like, it's a joke, but he's taking it seriously, and I found myself moved by him.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's probably the only. I mean, well, actually, that the Molina skit and the Cate Blanchett skit are probably the only two skits that like clearly have the narrative arc, and there's even this kind of various points of reversals. I mean, and the Molina, right, is very like classic reversal, or maybe two, right? I mean, there's the reveal of, oh, we're related, so that what does that change? Then there's the other guy pushing Molina off, and then discovering that actually he's more of a bigger fish than, right? He's a bigger fish than he'd originally thought, and then wanting to make contact and then not working. So yeah, so that's like very, in terms of scripting, it's very tightly written. And it's true, the Molina's character is the only one who's seeking a real emotional connection.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this podcast, I would say the Cate Blanchett one is definitely one to watch. I wouldn't sort of recommend all of these. You can sort of skip through, or you could just watch the Cate Blanchett one on YouTube. I think if you like Cate, I think this is sort of a good 11 minutes showing you some of the things that, as we talked about, she's good at, what she does best. And obviously she's also having fun with the whole thing. So it's a time well spent, I think. But Ella, I wanted to ask you about Jim Jarmusch in general. So Jim Jarmusch is a director, I have to say, I don't have a sort of firm grasp on him. I have seen many of his movies. There are some I haven't. So of his movies, the one that I can really unabashedly say I loved is Patterson. And I think that's maybe a little different than his other movies. I love that movie because it was sort of about an artist who maybe not a good artist, but also sort of like how determined he is to be. And it just had a lot of, it was modest, and it had a lot of generosity for its characters. And I love that about it. And I just thought Adam Driver was so great. We're talking about Cate here doing this heightened stylized performance where she is doing acting with her whole body and working with the makeup artist and with the costumer to create this character. Like Adam Driver in Patterson does none of that. And it's one of those performances that is way too subtle, but it's just still affecting. Like, I think maybe the direction to him was like, do less, because he doesn't do much, but it's still really affecting. So what do you think of? I just talked about Jim Jarmusch, but I want to hear you. What do you in general think about?
No, I mean, it's interesting if I were to say how to sum up Jim Jarmusch, because he has almost a place for me like this chameleon quality, what is quintessential Jarmusch, because I used to think of Jarmusch as this, and again, I haven't rewatched his filmography in so long, but I remember loving the early Jarmusch for just being so goddamn funny, and for this exhilaration of look how little you need, which is the exhilaration of independent cinema, right, of American independent cinema in general. Look how little you need to make a movie. A bunch of people and this kind of grainy quality that you see in Coffee and Cigarettes, that is so unlike what his films are looking like now, was certainly very, very appealing to me. That if you just have kind of situational humor and are good with lines and find these quirky characters that you can convey the atmosphere of what it's like, to guys walk into a bar kind of thing. It feels very urban. But the other film that I love, the Only Lovers Left Alive, is so stylized.
Yes.
And Patterson, even though you're probably right that they've been told to not to perform like in any kind of very heightened way, even that feels very scripted to me, and maybe much more like a traditional drama.
Yeah, it is. It is like that's like a very good way to put it. Like I think Patterson, when I said it was different, you sort of nailed it on the head. It's more of a traditional movie as opposed to sort of these, to your point, these sort of like fun exercises that he does. I mean, Only Lovers Left Alive, I think there was a narrative and a story, and it is a movie I saw and loved, but I don't remember anything about what the story was. I just thought it was really cool to watch, and it's sort of a mood, and to watch Tilda Swinton being a vampire, and it looked great, and everybody looked great, and that's what I remember from this mood of enjoying it as opposed to any narrative beats.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because such romanticism in that film, such mood in that film, and it's interesting because like when I think of early Jarmusch, I don't think of mood, I think of Malick that way, but not of Jarmusch. But that also makes you curious and excited. And if we talk about Jarmusch in 5, 10 years, which Jarmusch will we be talking about? And maybe that's also an indication that he's searching always for a new language and what is possible and what is available.
So if we want to bring it back to Cate Blanchett to sort of end this conversation, I was thinking about like, what does somebody like her, and in 2003 she was sort of at the height of her ability and at the height of her stardom. I think as she's shown us this year in Mrs. America, her ability hasn't waned or wavered. But I think in 2003, she was like at the height of sort of her stardom. It was a few years after Elizabeth. She was just about to win an Oscar for playing Katharine Hepburn. What does she get out of taking, I don't know, a week, 3 days to just play with Jim Jarmusch? And when I was thinking about what she got out of it, I remembered listening to her in an interview where she said, it's never about the part, and it's never about what I get to do, but it's who I'm in conversation with. And I think maybe she just wanted to be in conversation with Jim Jarmusch.
Or maybe just coffee and cigarettes. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I think that you're right. I mean, I think that the actors and performers that we end up admiring the most, and Cate Blanchett is an example, Kate Winslet is an example, Isabelle Huppert is an example. I mean, all of these are actresses who, again and again, say that it's about the experience, it's about the director, it's about wanting, you just really saying, I'll go out of my way, I want to work with that person.
Yeah.
No big or small or 2-day or 20-day shooting kind of thing, but more of go after that voice. I don't know. I would imagine that what you get out of it, that is also it keeps you going, keeps you excited. And it keeps you thinking. And Tilda Swinton, who's also worked with Jarmusch, is yet another example of an actress like this, right? I mean, she's done experimental film. She'll do a short movie with Almodovar, but she'll go on and do an experimental video. And she's worked with artists in London a lot, right, since the 70s or 80s, and has been kind of consistently building a career, as has Cate Blanchett, that has all these different components. And I think if you keep your world big enough and varied enough, it gets you, I think it keeps you on your toes. You don't settle, because if you settle too much, then you start repeating yourself. And certainly, particularly with someone who's of a caliber of a Cate Blanchett, who's going to have Hollywood roles coming our way, you have to particularly fight for that, right? Because you have a lot of incentive to settle and to kind of replicate yourself and duplicate yourself in very similar roles, and the industry always encourages that.
Yeah.
It doesn't encourage risk in that way, right? So nobody's going to fight. And I think also that's why actresses who, you know, who are good and who sustain these incredible roles and continue keeping us as the audience challenge, insist on this kind of engagement with particular directors, because that's also an insisting on taking risks.
Yeah. So is there anything you wanted to say about Jarmusch or Coffee and Cigarettes that we haven't touched on? Do you want to say before we end?
I say who hasn't seen his work, just watch the movie. Wait for Cate. Like, no, because it's also interesting now, because I mean, the little defense, like, who absolutely loves Cate and is saving herself or himself only for her parts, then by all means. But other than that, I think that there's a lot of joy of like going from skit to skit, and how she slides into it, and like how these, because it's, I think, I only say watch it because I think now that we're at home so much and that we're not congregating absolutely anywhere, and our coffee is probably to go, and hopefully cigarettes are out of the question. It's nice to kind of dive into that mood, you know, and to spend, you know, an hour and a bit.
And it's short. It's only an hour and 36 minutes.
Yeah, and the kind of flow, because I think it's also meant to have this kind of randomness of people that walk in from all walks of life, from some kind of dubious mafia guys, which we didn't talk about that skit, but
yeah.
You know, to a random chick who's like, unfortunately, looking through magazines, looking at arms, and sinister also, like very American, very sinister, but here in a particularly playful way.
Yeah, and there is a range definitely in the stories, in the performances, in the conversations, in the way, like, I think he worked with 3 different cinematographers, not just one. And like the movie, I think the Roberto Benigni one was shot in 1996, 97. So it's like they're shot over a long, actually not even the 90s. It was in the 80s, 1986, not 96. Yeah, so there's like a 17 years between when he started the project and when we see this finalized version. So yes, I would second what you were saying, that definitely watch it all. I was just saying that, you know, some of them don't work as much, but you know, it's fine. They're no more than 15 minutes.
But I mean, I also love, you know, I mean, Jim Jarmusch. The other thing is that regardless for what you think he's going, or you know, and to what extent it works and how he's stretching himself, he is somebody who insists on the value of this art experience. I mean, as you said in Patterson, it's touching, you know. I mean, there is this very, you know, not overblown, not sentimental, not saccharine, but nevertheless insistence on having this constant connection with art of cinema, with storytelling, and what it means to us. So, I mean, in that sense, you know, Jarmusch, like David Lynch, for example, is just one of those directors who came out from much, much smaller movies and now is increasingly on a much larger stage, but nevertheless, you know, retains some kind of core commitment to the craft, and I think to the magic of cinema and the way that he understands it. So it's great. I mean, thank you really for, you know, for giving me the opportunity to rewatch the film and kind of reconnect with that, because that's something that I think as an audience, I never get tired of.
Yeah. And thank you, Ela, for coming on Sundays with Cate. I enjoyed our conversation. You were a wonderful guest. And before we leave, let our listeners know where they can find you and your work.
Oh, sure. So I write about film for a wide variety of publications. I mean, in London for Sight and Sound, in New York for Film Comment, which now functions as this in this semi-form as a newsletter and an online. I think there's also an online component, if I'm correct, and podcasts. I was recently on a Film Comment podcast, so I'm a long-term contributor. In New York, I get to be wonderfully edited and be amongst really tremendous cinephile voices when I write for the online publication called The Reverse Shot. Reverse Shot is also wonderful. I write for art publications. I write for Hyperallergic a lot about experimental cinema as well as what's coming out hopefully soon to the local repertory theater when they come back full force. And I also have my own website. That's Lyssaria.com, LYSSARIA.com.
Thank you, Ela. And you can find me on Twitter at ME_says. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Sundays with Cate. And until next time, thank you for listening.